My brothers sold my childhood home until I proved I held the easement. If the front door of your childhood home could speak, it would have screamed the moment my brothers sold it behind my back. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, like this story, and comment where you're watching from, because this family betrayal story is one of the most shocking inheritance disputes you'll hear today. My name is Ethan Whitmore, and the house at the end of Hawthorne Lane was never just a building to me. It was the place where my father taught me how to swing a hammer, where my mother marked our heights on the kitchen wall every birthday, and where my brothers and I once promised that no matter what happened in life, that home would stay in the family forever. Promises, I learned, mean very little when money enters the room. 3 months after my mother passed away, the grief was still fresh enough to make every phone call feel heavy. My wife had undergone surgery in another city, and I stayed away longer than expected to care for her. During that time, I trusted my brothers, Marcus and Daniel, to handle the early paperwork related to our parents' estate. They told me not to worry. They said they would keep me informed. They said family comes first. That should have been my warning sign. The day I returned home, I drove down Hawthorne Lane, planning to sit on the porch for a while and remember my parents. I wanted one quiet moment in the place that held every important memory of my life. But when I turned the corner, I slammed on my brakes so hard my tires screamed against the road. A massive white sign stood in the front yard. Sold. At first, I thought it had to be some mistake. Maybe the realtor had the wrong address. Maybe it was for the empty lot next door. Maybe I was seeing things because grief had exhausted me. But then I saw strangers through the front window measuring the living room with tape measures. My chest tightened so fast I could barely breathe. I parked crooked, jumped from the car, and marched toward the front gate. A woman standing near the porch looked at me and asked politely if I needed something. Needed something? My voice shook when I answered. This is my family's house. She gave me a confused smile and said, not anymore. We close on Friday. My ears rang. My vision blurred. I stepped away before I said something I would regret and immediately called Marcus. He answered on the third ring, sounding irritated, like I had interrupted his lunch. What? He snapped. I asked him one question. Why is there a sold sign in front of our house? There was a pause. Then he sighed as if I were the inconvenience. Because we sold it, Ethan. I felt the blood drain from my face. You did what? Daniel's voice appeared in the background laughing, and then Marcus said the words I will never forget. You moved away. You weren't around. We handled it. The money's already divided. For a moment, I could not even process what I was hearing. My own brothers had sold our childhood home, our parents' home, without telling me. You had no right, I said through clenched teeth. Marcus actually laughed. Relax. It's just property. Stop being emotional. We each took our share. You'll get what's left after expenses. What was left? What was left? They sold the most important place in our family history and expected me to be grateful for leftovers. That was the moment this stopped being an inheritance dispute and became war. I stood outside the gate staring at the porch swing my father built with his own hands, the oak tree where my mother hung birthday decorations every summer, and the upstairs bedroom window where I had spent nights dreaming about my future. Every inch of that property carried memories. And my brothers had traded all of it for cash. Family greed exposed itself fully that day. I drove straight to Marcus's house, fury burning so hot I barely remember the trip. When he opened the door, he had the nerve to look annoyed instead of ashamed. Daniel was sitting on the couch inside drinking beer like this was an ordinary afternoon. Tell me you're joking, I said. Tell me this is some misunderstanding. Marcus folded his arms. It's done. Daniel smirked. You're overreacting. Mom and Dad are gone. The house was just sitting there. We sold it. Move on. Move on. As if grief had an off switch. As if betrayal by blood could be filed away neatly like paperwork. I demanded to know how they had sold jointly inherited property without my consent. Marcus explained that because he had temporary control over estate administration paperwork, he pushed everything through while I was away. He said if I wanted to challenge it, I could waste money on lawyers. Then Daniel leaned forward and said with a grin, "Face it, Ethan. You lost. The house is gone." Those words should have broken me. Instead, they lit something in me. Because while my brothers saw a house, I saw my parents' legacy. While they saw quick money, I saw betrayal. While they thought they had beaten me, I knew one thing for certain: people who lie that boldly usually miss something important. I looked both of them dead in the eye and said, "If you think this is over, you don't know me at all." Marcus laughed again. "There's nothing you can do." I turned and walked out without another word, but inside my head every memory of my father began replaying itself. He had always said the same thing whenever one of us faced trouble: the truth is in the paperwork. My father had been meticulous with records, deeds, maps, contracts, surveys, receipts. Every document neatly stored in metal filing cabinets in the basement workshop. That night, while my brothers celebrated their stolen money, I drove to the old storage unit where many of Dad's things had been kept after his death. Dust covered everything. Boxes were stacked to the ceiling. My hands shook as I opened cabinet after cabinet, searching through decades of files under the weak yellow light. Property tax records. Renovation permits. Land surveys. Bank papers. Then, near the back of the final drawer, I found an envelope labeled in my father's handwriting, "Property Access Agreement, Whitmore Land." My pulse quickened. I opened it carefully, unaware that inside those pages lay the secret that would destroy my brother's victory and turn this family betrayal story into the legal revenge story of a lifetime. And as I stood there reading the first lines of that document, one thing became crystal clear: Marcus and Daniel had not just underestimated me. They had made the biggest mistake of their lives. If you think this property rights revenge story is getting started, subscribe now, like this video, and get ready, because in the next chapter, my brothers will learn that selling my childhood home was the most expensive mistake they ever made. The envelope trembled in my hands as I pulled the yellow pages free and spread them across the dusty workbench in my father's storage unit. At first glance, it looked like another old survey map. Lines, measurements, signatures, legal stamps, but then my eyes landed on the words that made my heart pound so hard I could hear it in my ears: permanent easement granted to Ethan Whitmore. I read the sentence once. Then twice. Then, a third time, just to make sure grief and anger were not making me imagine things. But the words did not change. My father had legally granted me an easement over the rear access road and shared driveway that crossed the western side of the property. Years ago, permanently, and in writing. That single document changed everything. If you've never heard of an easement dispute before, here's what matters: the only practical road leading to the rear half of our childhood home's land passed through the access route now legally controlled by me. No contractor, no buyer, no developer could fully use the property the way they intended without my permission. And based on the survey notes attached, that rear portion was exactly what made the land valuable in the first place. My brothers had sold the house, but they had sold it with a hidden problem so severe it could destroy the entire deal. I leaned against the table and laughed, a slow, stunned laugh that came from pure disbelief. Marcus and Daniel thought they had beaten me. They thought this inheritance dispute was over. They thought I would simply disappear while they spent their share of the money. But the truth was sitting in my hands, signed by my father, notarized, recorded, and legally enforceable. Family greed had blinded them so completely that they never bothered checking the full property file before selling the one thing they thought they controlled. My father had been smarter than all of us. Suddenly, I remembered the summer I was 24, when Dad wanted to expand the rear workshop and add storage barns behind the house. Marcus and Daniel refused to contribute because they said the project was a waste of money. I was the only one who helped him finance it. We split the cost of grading the rear land and building the gravel road that connected to the back acreage. Dad had thanked me by saying, "If you're paying for access, you should always have access." At the time, I thought it was just one of his usual lessons. I had no idea he turned that promise into legal paperwork. The more I read, the more devastating the truth became for my brothers. The easement was not temporary. It was not informal. It was recorded with the county land office and attached to the title history. That meant Marcus and Daniel either never checked the property documents before the sale, or they checked and ignored it. Either way, they had walked the buyer straight into a legal nightmare. And in a property law twist, this perfect, the buyer would not blame me. He would blame them. I immediately photographed every page, then drove straight to the office of the best property attorney in town, Victoria Hayes. She was known for being sharp, expensive, and utterly ruthless in court. I laid the documents on her desk and explained everything. From my brothers secretly selling the childhood home to the easement my father left me. She read in silence, then looked up with a slow smile. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "your brothers may have just committed the dumbest act of real estate fraud I've seen this year." Hearing a professional confirm it sent a rush of satisfaction through me. Victoria explained that because the easement controlled access to a major portion of the land, any buyer planning renovation, redevelopment, subdivision, or expansion would be severely restricted. The property's market value could collapse. If the buyer was not properly informed of the easement before closing, Marcus and Daniel could face lawsuits for non-disclosure, misrepresentation, and damages. "Can I stop them?" I asked. Victoria's answer was immediate. Yes. Those 3 letters felt like oxygen after drowning. She drafted a formal legal notice on the spot, notifying the buyer, developer, and title company of my easement rights and my refusal to permit interference. By the next morning, copies had been delivered everywhere they needed to go. Then we waited. The call came less than 6 hours later. Marcus's name flashed across my phone. I answered and held the phone away from my ear because I already knew he would be shouting. "What did you do?" He screamed the second I picked up. I let him rage for a few seconds before answering calmly. I informed the buyer of my easement. Silence. Then came the panic in his voice. "You knew about this?" "No," I said. "But Dad did." Daniel grabbed the phone next. "You can't do this. You're sabotaging the sale." I almost laughed at the hypocrisy. "No," I replied. "You sabotaged the sale when you sold property you didn't fully control." Marcus tried to recover his confidence. "It's just some paperwork. We'll fix it." Victoria, sitting across from me in her office, mouthed one word, "No." I smiled and repeated it into the phone. "No, you won't." Then I hung up. The next 48 hours were chaos. Word spread quickly that the buyer, Richard Holloway, a wealthy developer with plans to tear down the house and build luxury townhomes, was furious. His architects had specifically chosen the property because of rear lot development potential. Without access to the back section, the entire investment model collapsed. What had looked like a profitable development became a legal trap. My brothers, who had strutted around like victorious businessmen 2 days earlier, were now scrambling from lawyer to lawyer trying to find a way out. But there was no easy way out. The easement was real. It was valid. And it belonged to me. Then came the knock at my door. Marcus and Daniel stood outside, looking nothing like the smug men who had mocked me. Their expensive clothes were wrinkled. Their eyes were tired. Panic had replaced arrogance. "We need to talk," Marcus said. I stepped outside but did not invite them in. Daniel spoke first, forcing a fake calm tone. "Look, we may have made a mistake." I stared at him. "A mistake?" Marcus nodded quickly. "We can work this out. Just sign off on the easement release, and everyone moves on." There it was. The first desperate request. The beginning of their fall. I folded my arms and asked the question they never expected, "Why would I help you?" Neither answered. Because there was no answer. Because greed had driven them to erase me, and now they needed the brother they betrayed to save them. For the first time in this family betrayal story, they understood the truth. They had power when they thought I had nothing. But now I held the one thing they needed most. And I had no intention of giving it away for free. As they stood there waiting, I gave them the same cold smile Marcus gave me when he told me the house was sold. You said I had no say, I reminded them. Looks like I do now. Their faces fell. Because in that moment, my brothers finally realized this was no longer their victory story. It had become my property rights revenge story. And it was only getting started. Marcus and Daniel stood frozen on my porch like men who had just watched the ground vanish beneath their feet. For once in their lives, they had no clever answer, no smug comeback, no way to twist the story in their favor. They simply stared at me, realizing the brother they treated like an outsider now controlled the fate of everything they had stolen. Marcus recovered first. He forced a laugh, but his voice shook. Come on, Ethan. Don't be dramatic. We're family. The nerve of that sentence almost made me smile. Family. They remembered that word only when they needed something. I stepped closer and looked both of them in the eye. You stopped being family when you sold our childhood home behind my back. Daniel's jaw tightened. You're really going to ruin us over this? No, I said calmly. You ruined yourselves. Then I shut the door in their faces. By the next morning, the inheritance dispute had exploded into full legal war. My attorney, Victoria Hayes, called before sunrise with the update I had been waiting for. Richard Holloway, the developer who bought the property, had officially halted closing and demanded an emergency meeting with everyone involved. He wanted answers. He wanted compensation. Most of all, he wanted to know why two sellers had failed to disclose that a permanent easement made his development plan nearly impossible. Victoria asked if I wanted to attend. My answer was immediate. Absolutely. The meeting took place in a downtown law office so polished it looked more like a bank vault than a conference room. Richard Holloway sat at the far end of the table in an expensive suit, his face red with anger. His legal team lined one side. Marcus and Daniel sat on the other side, pale and sweating through their shirts. The moment I entered, every eye turned toward me. Richard pointed immediately. That's him. Victoria nodded. This is Ethan Whitmore, holder of the easement in question. Richard stared at me like he was measuring whether I was an obstacle or an opportunity. Then he turned slowly toward my brothers. You told me this property had unrestricted development access. Marcus opened his mouth. We believed it did. Richard slammed his palm onto the table so hard everyone jumped. Believed, he shouted. I don't spend 7 figures on belief. I spend it on facts. Daniel tried to jump in. This can still be fixed. Richard cut him off with a glare sharp enough to stop a train. Fixed. Your omission has put my entire project at risk. My contractors are delayed. My investors are calling. My permits may need revision. Do you have any idea what this costs me per day? Neither brother answered. They could not. Because for the first time, they were trapped in a room with someone even more ruthless than they were. Richard turned back to me. Mr. Whitmore, what exactly do you want? The room went silent. Everyone knew this property law twist had turned me into the most important person at the table. I leaned back and answered carefully. At this moment? Nothing. I simply intend to enforce my legal rights. Richard narrowed his eyes. Meaning? Victoria spoke before I did. Meaning my client will not waive, transfer, reduce, or modify his easement rights at this time. Marcus exploded. This is insane. Ethan, stop acting like a child. I turned to him slowly. You sold our parents' home in secret and forged ahead like I didn't matter. Now you want fairness? Daniel slammed his hand on the table. We'll pay you. Every head turned. There it was. Desperation had entered the room. My brothers were no longer pretending this was a misunderstanding. they knew they needed to buy their way out. "How much?" Daniel asked. "Name your price." I almost laughed. They thought this was about money. They still did not understand. "You think this is about cash?" I said quietly. "You sold the last thing Mom and Dad built. You erased me from the decision. And now you think I'll help because you wave money at me." Marcus's face darkened. "Don't be stupid. Take the money." Richard watched the entire exchange with growing disgust. Finally, he leaned back and muttered, "Unbelievable." Then louder, "Gentlemen, unless Mr. Whitmore releases his easement, this transaction is dead. And if it dies because you misrepresented the asset, I will sue both of you personally for every cent of damage." The blood drained from their faces. My brothers had gone from greedy sellers to potential defendants in a lawsuit worth more than they could imagine. That was the moment they finally understood the true cost of betrayal. The meeting ended in chaos. Richard stormed out with his attorneys. Marcus chased after him, begging for time. Daniel remained behind, glaring at me with open hatred. "You enjoying this?" he hissed. I met his stare. "No. I'm surviving it." Then I walked out. Over the next week, their lives began collapsing piece by piece. Richard filed formal claims for non-disclosure and breach of contract. The title company froze the sale proceeds. My brothers' bank accounts became tangled in legal review. Their celebration money disappeared into retainers and emergency legal fees. Word spread through town fast. Family greed exposed, brothers sued over bad property sale, inheritance dispute turns into real estate disaster. Suddenly, the same people who once praised Marcus and Daniel for handling the estate were whispering behind their backs. Then came the most satisfying moment yet. Marcus arrived alone at my office one rainy afternoon. Gone was the expensive watch, the confident smile, the swagger. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. He sat down across from me and placed a folded paper on the desk. "What is this?" I asked. "An offer." I opened it and nearly laughed. They were offering me 40% of their proceeds in exchange for releasing the easement. 40%. The same brothers who told me I deserved leftovers were now offering nearly half their money just to save themselves. I slid the paper back. "No," Marcus blinked. "Did you hear me? That's hundreds of thousands." "No," his voice rose. "What do you want then?" I leaned forward and gave him the answer he feared most. "I want you to understand what it feels like to lose something you thought was yours." He stared at me, speechless. I stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. "You stole my voice in this family. You stole my place in that house. You stole my trust. And now you want me to rescue you from consequences." Marcus whispered, "Please." That word from him was almost surreal. The brother who mocked me, dismissed me, and cut me out was begging. I turned back slowly. "No." He left without another word. And as the door shut behind him, I knew this legal revenge story had reached a point of no return. My brothers had lost control. Their buyer was hunting them. Their money was frozen. Their reputations were ruined. And they still had no idea that the final blow, the one that would cost them everything, was still coming. Marcus left my office looking like a man walking to his own execution, and for the first time since this family betrayal story began, I felt something colder than anger settle in my chest, clarity. My brothers were no longer the ones holding power. The men who had laughed when they sold my childhood home now woke up every morning wondering how much more they were about to lose. And the worst part for them was this: every disaster hitting their lives had started with one simple choice. They chose greed over family. The legal pressure came down harder with every passing day. Richard Holloway's lawsuit grew more aggressive. His attorneys demanded damages not only for the failed sale but for lost development time, contractor penalties, permit delays, and reputational harm with his investors. Numbers started appearing in legal filings so large that Marcus and Daniel stopped pretending they could fix this. Their lawyers advised settlement. Their accountants warned bankruptcy was possible. Their friends stopped returning calls. Even family members who once defended them began whispering that they had gone too far. Family greed exposed itself publicly, and the shame of it spread through the town like wildfire. Then Daniel called me at midnight. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. The second I answered, I heard panic in his breathing. "Please," he said. "Not hello. Not Ethan. Just please." I sat up in bed and listened. Richard's attorneys are filing for full damages. Marcus is losing his house if this goes to trial. We can't survive this. I said nothing. Silence forced him to continue. We were wrong. Hearing those words from Daniel felt like hearing thunder in winter, unnatural and too late. We shouldn't have sold the house without you. We shouldn't have cut you out. We made a mistake. I answered with the truth he deserved. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. He broke. What do you want from us? That was the question they had asked again and again, always assuming this was about money, leverage, or negotiation. But what they still failed to understand was that some things cannot be priced. I want you to live with what you did, I said, and ended the call. The next week, they showed up at my house together again. This time there was no arrogance left in either of them. No polished clothes. No expensive confidence. Just fear. Marcus held a folder so tightly his knuckles were white. Daniel would not even meet my eyes. We brought another offer, Marcus said. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. Talk. He handed me the folder. Inside was a new proposal, nearly all of their remaining proceeds, plus a formal written apology, plus a promise to publicly acknowledge my legal rights in exchange for my release of the easement. I looked at the numbers and shook my head. Marcus stared at me in disbelief. That's everything we have left. I know, I said. Daniel's voice cracked. Then why isn't it enough? Because it was never about enough. It was about the fact that when our mother died, they looked at the home she loved and saw dollar signs. It was about the fact that when I was away caring for my wife, they saw an opportunity to erase me. It was about the fact that they smiled while doing it. I handed the folder back. Because you only regret it now that it hurt you. Marcus's face twisted. You're destroying your own brothers. I stepped closer until he had to look directly at me. No. You destroyed yourselves the moment you believed I didn't matter. For a second I thought Marcus might explode. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened, and rage flashed across his face. But then something remarkable happened. He deflated. His shoulders dropped. His eyes lowered. The fight left him. That was when I knew they had finally accepted reality. They could not bully me. They could not manipulate me. They could not outlast me. The only thing left for them was consequences. 2 days later Richard Holloway did exactly what everyone expected. He officially terminated the sale contract and filed a full damages claim against Marcus and Daniel for fraud, non-disclosure, and contractual losses. The amount was catastrophic. Their legal team negotiated desperately, but Richard wanted blood. He had been embarrassed in front of investors, delayed on a major project, and publicly tied to a failed real estate deal. He intended to make them pay for it. Over the next month their lives collapsed in slow motion. Marcus listed his luxury car for sale. Daniel refinanced his house twice trying to stay afloat. Their savings vanished. Creditors called constantly. The brothers who once acted like kings after selling my childhood home were now drowning in debt created by their own betrayal. And then came the final humiliation, because with the sale cancelled and the lawsuit settlement draining their finances, they could no longer maintain ownership of the property itself. The estate entered forced liquidation. Our childhood home, the one they had sold so proudly, was headed to auction. When Victoria told me, I sat in silence for nearly a minute. Fate had a strange sense of justice. The house they stole from me was coming back onto the market because of the very scheme they used to take it. Marcus called one last time before the auction. His voice sounded hollow. "Please," he whispered, "don't take the house from us." I almost laughed at the irony. "Take it from you?" I asked. "You sold it. We can still save it somehow." "No," I said firmly. "You lost it the day you chose money over blood." He broke down crying then. Actual tears, the kind I had never heard from him in my life. But pity did not come. Some bridges burn because of anger. Others burn because one side keeps pouring gasoline and calling it business. I hung up knowing the next time I saw my brothers would be at the auction of the house they once believed they owned without question. And for the first time since this inheritance dispute began, I allowed myself to imagine what came next. The porch. The oak tree. The kitchen wall with our childhood height marks. My parents' home. Not sold. Not destroyed. Not turned into luxury townhomes. Restored. Because the brothers who betrayed me were about to learn the final lesson in this property rights revenge story. When you gamble your family's legacy for greed, sometimes the person you try to erase becomes the one who takes everything back. The morning of the auction arrived grey and cold, the kind of weather that made the world feel quiet before something important happened. I stood across the street from my childhood home with my hands in my coat pockets, staring at the porch where my mother used to drink coffee every sunrise and the upstairs window where I once watched thunderstorms roll over the neighborhood as a boy. The house looked exactly the same, but everything around it had changed. The brothers who betrayed me were no longer standing proudly as owners. They were standing beside the gate like broken men watching the last thing they had left slip through their fingers. If you followed this family betrayal story from the beginning, subscribe now, like this story, and comment where you're watching from, because what happened next completed one of the most satisfying property rights revenge stories you will ever hear. Marcus and Daniel looked hollow. Their suits were cheap now. Their confidence was gone. Their faces carried the exhaustion of sleepless nights, court hearings, creditor calls, and public humiliation. The same men who once laughed when they sold my childhood home without me were now begging the auctioneer for extra time they would never get. But time had run out. Richard Holloway's lawsuit had drained them. Their legal settlements had devoured their profits. Their debts had consumed everything they thought they had won. And now the house, the very house they betrayed me to sell, was being auctioned because they could no longer afford to keep it in the estate. Justice has a way of circling back when greed moves too fast. The auction began with a crowd of investors, developers, and local buyers gathering in the front yard. Most had already heard the story. Inheritance dispute. Family greed exposed. Brothers sued after hidden easement destroys property sale. It had become town gossip for months. Some people came to bid. Others came simply to watch the ending. Marcus spotted me near the fence and his face drained of color. Daniel followed his gaze and froze. Neither of them had expected me to show up. They should have known better. I did not miss endings. The auctioneer began calling for opening bids. A few investors raised paddles. Numbers climbed. The house rose steadily toward market value, then began slowing. The investors knew the property had complications. They knew redevelopment was impossible without my easement cooperation. They knew any buyer would need to deal with me eventually. That uncertainty kept the bidding cautious. Then, when the room, or rather the yard, went quiet, I raised my hand. Every head turned. Marcus whispered something to Daniel that looked dangerously close to panic. I placed my bid calmly. Another investor countered. I answered. He hesitated. I raised again. He folded. The auctioneer shouted once, twice, 3 times. And the gavel came down. Sold. To Ethan Whitmore. For a fraction of what Marcus and Daniel once thought they would make from the original sale. The silence that followed was almost surreal. Then whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. People turned toward my brothers, watching their faces as reality crushed them all over again. They had betrayed me to sell my childhood home, only for me to buy it back after their own greed destroyed them. The legal revenge story was complete. Marcus stumbled toward me as people dispersed. "You planned this?" he asked, his voice hollow. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "No. You planned this? I just finished it." He flinched like I had struck him. Daniel's eyes burned with humiliation and resentment. "You think you won?" he spat. I turned toward the house, keys in hand. "No," I said quietly. "I think Mom and Dad's home is where it belongs." They had no response to that. Because deep down, they knew I was right. The months that followed were the most peaceful I had experienced in years. I restored the house room by room. I repaired the porch swing my father built. I repainted the kitchen in the same warm color my mother loved. I preserved the height marks on the wall exactly as they were, every childhood measurement untouched. I replanted the flowers by the walkway. I rebuilt the back workshop. Every nail I hammered into place felt like reclaiming something more than wood and brick. It felt like reclaiming memory, dignity, and the part of myself my brothers tried to erase. Word of what happened spread far beyond town. People who heard the story called it unbelievable. Some called it karma. Others called it the most satisfying family betrayal story they had ever heard. But for me, it was simpler than that. It was proof that greed destroys the people who feed it. Marcus and Daniel never truly recovered. Their finances were shattered. Their reputations were ruined. Their friendships faded. The brothers who once believed money mattered more than blood learned the hardest lesson of their lives: when you betray family for profit, the cost can exceed anything you gain. We never repaired our relationship. Some wounds close. Others scar forever. And while I did not celebrate their suffering, I never apologized for defending what was mine. Because standing in that restored house one evening, watching sunset light pour through the living room windows just as it had when I was a child, I understood something clearly: this was never about revenge alone. It was about refusing to let betrayal rewrite history. It was about refusing to let people who valued greed over love decide what mattered. It was about proving that being quiet does not mean being weak, and being overlooked does not mean being powerless. Sometimes the people others dismiss are simply waiting for the right moment to stand up. 1 year after the auction, I hosted a family memorial dinner in the restored house for the relatives who had supported me through everything. As laughter filled the dining room and candlelight reflected off the old windows, I looked around and realized my parents' legacy had survived. Not because of luck. Not because of kindness. But because when family greed tried to destroy it, I fought back with truth, patience, and the law. So if there is one lesson in this inheritance dispute, it is this: never mistake silence for surrender, never assume the person you pushed aside has no power, and never sell someone's childhood home unless you are absolutely certain they have no way to take it back. My brothers learned that lesson too late. And every time I unlock the front door to the home they tried to steal from me, I remember one final truth: betrayal may win the first move, but it does not always win the game. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe, like, and comment below where you are watching from, and tell me, if your own family betrayed you like this, would you have done the same?